The 911 phone rang on a quiet Christmas Eve in Albany. A panicked male voice said, "She's been shot. It was an accident." But was it really an accident? But was it really an accident? Sky Lemons Dixon, 23 years old, is a girl who makes anyone who meets her feel the light inside her. Growing up amidst loss, losing her mother when she was only 11 years old, Sky was a broken child. But instead of falling, she chose to love. Love life, love animals, love friends, and simple dreams of a better future. On the night of December 25th, 2023, when the whole city of Albany was immersed in sparkling lights and festive bells, Sky was in a small apartment on State Street with three friends: Patrick Dean, Ibrahim Hammond, and Michael Varlak. They drank, talked. It seemed like a warm, festive night like any other. But in a split second, gunshots rang out. And then life was cut short. A bullet, an excuse of an accident. A young girl collapsed, never to wake up. In that small apartment, what really happened? A moment of carelessness, or a dark secret hidden behind lies? This is not just a story about a shooting. This is the retelling of a night that none of them, and none of us, will ever forget. December 25th, 2023 began like any other holiday. People gathered together, sipping wine, laughing and sharing old stories. For Sky Lemons Dixon, that Christmas Eve was a quiet moment in the busy days. She went to the apartment on State Street where close friends gathered, celebrating the holiday together in a cozy atmosphere. In the small room, only a few square meters, yellow lights cast a glass of red wine. Soft music played from the phone speaker. The three men present in the room, Patrick Dean, Ibrahim Hammond, and Michael Varlak, were all familiar faces to Sky. They had talked many times, even drank together on previous occasions. For Sky, it was a place close enough to not need to be on guard. But it was in that space that the tragedy began. Around 10 p.m., amid the excitement, Patrick Dean suddenly pulled out a pistol. No one knew why, perhaps to show off, perhaps just an impulsive act after having had too much to drink. But the looks in the room began to change, from relief to confusion, then anxiety. "No load," Dean might have said in a careless way, someone later recounted. But the moment his finger unconsciously touched the trigger, things became irreversible. A deafening bang rang out. Sky collapsed. The bullet went straight through her head. The atmosphere instantly fell into chaos. The room, once filled with laughter, was now silent, save for heavy breathing and panicked eyes. Dean dropped the gun, trembling. Hammond whispered over and over, "Accident, just an accident." Varlak sank to the floor, holding his head. No one left the room. They frantically called 911, trying to figure out how to explain. But the truth was written on the floor in Sky's blood, clear and indelible. There had been no fight before, no explosive argument, no warnings or signs of anything unusual. Just a stupid move and a fateful end. In that apartment, everyone was a witness. And no matter what they said, the truth was, the moment the gunshot rang out, when time seemed to stop, and the whole room was plunged into a cold that did not belong to winter, but to death. The gunshot did not last long, but its echo made the room silent as if time had stopped. For a few seconds after the shot, no one spoke. No one moved. No one dared to believe what had just happened. The first to react was Ibrahim Hammond. He rushed to where Sky lay motionless on the floor, eyes wide open, hands still gripping the edge of the chair. A small stream of blood oozed from her left temple, dark red, slowly as if life was trying to cling to its last moments. Michael Varlak stepped back, mumbling something indistinct, his hands shaking, his forehead breaking out in cold sweat. Patrick Dean stood as if petrified, his bewildered gaze directed at the gun now lying at his feet. I didn't mean to," he whispered unconsciously. Only a few dozen seconds later, Hammond was the one who pressed the phone. The 911 call was made in a state of complete disarray. His voice was shaky and broken. She's been shot. She's not breathing. I don't know what to do." The operator kept calm, telling them not to leave the scene and to immediately administer first aid if possible. But the truth was, none of them knew how. And Skye, though her eyes were still open, was starting to lose color. The ambulance and police arrived in less than 10 minutes. Neighbors had begun to open their doors, and a few people from the hallway were peering into the apartment in horror. The paramedics entered first. A nurse bent down to check her pulse, and another prepared a resuscitation machine. Skye was still breathing, albeit faintly. They quickly put on a neck brace, loaded her onto a stretcher, and rushed her straight to Albany Medical Center. The police immediately began to reconstruct the scene. The small apartment was no longer a place of laughter or festive wine. The carpet where Skye had fallen was soaked with blood, a silent circle. The wine glasses were still on the table. The music was still playing. Everything was a picture of calm in the storm of panic. There was no sign of a struggle, no scratches, no screams from before, but the cold permeated every corner, and the air carried a distinct metallic smell. The smell of blood and death, the kind of thing Christmas should never be. Skye Lemons Dixon had been found half dead, and that was just the beginning of a nightmare that would last for months. When the police sealed off the apartment on State Street, everything seemed to stand still at the moment of the tragedy. The small living room, the chair where Skye had sat, the unfinished glass of red wine, the music speaker still playing a sad melody, all became silent witnesses to the fateful moment. At the scene, the first thing investigators noticed was the pistol lying near the table leg, with no obvious cartridge, but still with smoke stains inside. Next to it, a single shell casing was found. The bullet had penetrated the victim's left temple, traveling in a straight, deadly trajectory. There were no signs of a struggle. No objects were knocked over. This made the investigation team wonder, was this really an accident as initially reported? The forensic results a few days later raised even more suspicions. The medical examiner confirmed that the bullet was fired from close range, very close, and that the trajectory of the bullet suggested that the victim was sitting in a vulnerable, defenseless position. Skye died from severe head trauma, which led to a coma and brain death after a week of treatment. One notable detail: Dean's hand still had gunpowder residue, which proved that he was the one who pulled the trigger. But why was he holding the gun? And was it an unintentional act, or something else masked by silence? The investigation was forced to dig deeper. Soon after Skye Lemons Dixon was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, the Albany Police Department immediately launched an investigation. The 3 people present at the scene were identified as Patrick Dean, Michael Varlak, and Ibrahim Hammond. And those were the first 3 names detained for questioning. There were no strangers, no signs of forced entry, and no surveillance cameras in the apartment. Like a chess game without all the pieces, all clues depended on testimony. The first round of questioning took place that night. All 3 insisted that the incident was an unfortunate accident. Dean said that he had accidentally picked up the gun and didn't think there was a bullet. Varlak was defensive. I wasn't involved. I was just drinking and talking. Hammond repeatedly emphasized that no one did it on purpose. However, it was the excessive synchronicity in the stories that made the investigators suspicious. Each repeated the same script, the same phrases, the same descriptions, as if they had prepared their answers in advance. But in the small details, holes began to appear. During the second interrogation, Dean accidentally said that he had shown the gun to Sky, completely contradicting his first statement that he just held it for fun. Meanwhile, Hammond said that Sky had never touched the gun. A secret recording from the interrogation room's microphone showed that when an investigator left the room, Dean whispered to Varlak, "Just say it the same way. Don't change anything." This detail became the first point of failure in the deceitful picture they were trying to paint. The forensic department continued to review the evidence. The gunpowder residue on Dean's hand matched the bullet. On the gun, the fingerprints were his alone. Neither Varlak nor Hammond left any traces of contact. Notably, a small amount of blood that did not belong to Sky was found on Dean's sleeve, a possible reaction to pulling the trigger at close range. The psychological twist came in the second week. As the police separated each suspect, they began to change tactics. With Dean, they didn't question him. They talked about Sky. They talked about the animals she had raised, the children she had tutored, the dreams she had yet to realize. Dean's silence lasted 17 minutes before he burst into tears. "I was just trying to scare. I didn't mean to," Dean confessed in his third statement, but he quickly retracted his statement and blamed a mechanical problem with the gun. The police saw Dean as wavering, someone who knew he was guilty but wasn't ready to face it. Meanwhile, an unexpected witness emerged. A neighbor who lived next door reported hearing a man's voice laughing loudly about a gun a few minutes before the explosion, but no screaming or fighting. This detail helps to reinforce the idea that the incident was not about self-defense or an argument, but rather an act of recklessly carrying a gun in the air, leading to serious consequences. On January 3, 2024, Patrick Dean was officially charged with second-degree manslaughter, illegal possession of a weapon, and destruction of evidence. Michael Varlak, although not directly involved, was prosecuted for possession of a weapon and sentenced to 3 to 6 years in prison. Ibrahim Hammond was further investigated after his testimony was found to be full of discrepancies and was eventually charged with perjury, facing 2 to 7 years in prison. The investigation file is more than 200 pages thick, including testimony, forensic examination results, traces of weapons, crime scene reports, and even criminal psychology analysis. It shows a series of uncontrolled behavior, disregard for safety, and evasion of responsibility after the consequences occurred. The case ended with an unanswered question. Was this really just an accident, or was it a tragedy born of subjectivity, negligence, and unstable character disguised as friends? For Sky's family, the truth is not in the testimony. It is in the fact that she is dead and no one can bring her back. June 12, 2025. The Albany County Courthouse was packed. The air in the courtroom was thick, not because of the summer heat outside, but because of the heavy feeling of eyes watching one man sitting silently in the dock. Patrick Dean. After nearly 2 years of investigation, adjournment, negotiation, and trial, Patrick Dean appeared in court charged with 3 counts: second-degree manslaughter, unlawful possession of a weapon, and tampering with evidence. Beside him stood his defense attorney, while the prosecution consisted of 3 people, led by a sharp-tongued female prosecutor who had been with the case from day one. Dean did not argue. He pleaded guilty. However, the trial did not end quickly. Judge William Little asked for full testimony, reports, and especially statements from the victims' families, as a way to close the journey of justice, not just with the law, but with truth and emotion. The shocking testimony came from Sky's sister, Zoe Lemons Hall. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes were firm. She said, "You can apologize, But what Sky needs is not an apology. She needs a life. Sky's aunt, Karen Lemons, also stood up. Sky asked me, "Am I worthy of love?" And I said, "You are the light." That light is now extinguished. Outside the court, the crowd carried pictures of Sky, candles, flowers, and signs calling for gun control. The case has been the focus of the media for months, not only because of its tragic nature, but because it reflects the reality that guns still infiltrate every corner of life, even in the place that seems safest, among friends. The final verdict was announced. Patrick Dean was sentenced to 16 to 19 years in prison. No one applauded, no one cheered. There was only a silence as a confirmation. Justice does not bring anyone back, but at least the person responsible has been named. In the yellow light of the courtroom, Dean's eyes were filled with tears. It was unclear whether it was because of regret or because he knew he would spend the rest of his life in the dark. As for Sky, the girl who loved animals and loved to laugh gently, she would forever stop at the age of 23, never to hear the verdict or know that her name had become a symbol of a pain that went beyond the individual. Sky Lemons Dixon is no stranger to the small community in Albany. She was the friendly neighbor, the gentle friend, the girl who once took in stray cats and dogs and spent her meager salary helping others. But today, when mentioning her name, people cannot separate it from a gunshot and an evening that will never be forgotten. The loss left behind is not just the death of a young person. It is the void where there should have been laughter, maturity, simple dreams like opening a small bookstore or adopting a blind cat. It is the broken hearts of loved ones who must continue to live with the memory of something that could have been avoided. The Sky case is not simply a personal tragedy. It raises big questions about safety, responsibility, and the law. Why is it so easy for someone with a criminal record to own a gun? Why is it that in a space of friends, no one stops dangerous actions? And why do we only face the consequences when lives are lost? Justice has spoken, but it cannot bring Sky back. The only thing left is a profound reminder. A moment of inattention, a thoughtless act, can take away another person's life. Sky's story also asks each of us, not only about gun control, but also about trust, responsibility, and humanity. Are we living carefully enough to protect the people we love? And when faced with the choice between silence or action, what would you do if you were a witness to that fateful moment?